News from the colonies! News from the colonies! Washington declares independence! Read all about it. There you are, something.
If you found yourself as a redcoat defending the American colonies during the War of Independence, you were likely to face some of the most horrific conditions just about anywhere in the world. What may have first seemed a patriotic and even exhilarating endeavour would soon turn into a bitter struggle through which your loyalties to the crown would be severely tested.
Rather than a political or social movement devised by the great founding fathers and resulting in the smooth birth of a nation, the American Revolution truly consisted of a hard, bloody and destructive war. A civil conflict that impacted the lives of so many and would take the lives of thousands of soldiers who fought in it. But look at the paintings from the period, the history books, Broadway musicals and Hollywood depictions of this war, and you'd believe it to be a chess match won by plucky patriot underdogs against out-of-touch aristocratic generals. Beneath all of this was the reality, an arduous series of skirmishes, sieges and pitched battles fought between ordinary British regulars and loyalist troops against so-called rebel militias and Washington's Continental Army. This would be a war of attrition, a fight against the elements, and a true test of loyalty. So what was life actually like for the average redcoat on the ground? In this series, in collaboration with Survive History, I'll be recruited into the 33rd Regiment of Foot, a proud military unit commanded by Lord Charles Cornwallis that took part in almost all major campaigns of the American War of Independence. With a combination of first-hand accounts and hands-on experience, I'll discover how ordinary civilians in Britain could find themselves in the deep heartland of America within a matter of months.
You can be a drunkard, a layabout and join any other battalion, but not in Cornwallis's 33rd.
Fire!
How they adjusted to the novel tactics used by the rebels.
They might grab them, take a pot shot, hide the weapons again, and then act as though they're just going about their business.
The extreme conditions in the colonies.
Temperatures sometimes exceeding 38 degrees centigrade. I know they're going to break my teeth. Yeah, it's just so you've got to dip it in something.
And what the chances were of making it out alive. So the question is, could you survive as a British redcoat in the American War of Independence?
In 1777, a 15-year-old boy was about to make a decision that would alter the course of his life forever. On the run from his parents' abusive household in Yorkshire, he had put on his best apparel and made his way for the city of Leeds. His name was John Robert Shaw, and he was to become a king's soldier.
This wasn't the first time the teenager had fled from his native town of Basildon with such an intention. Having run over 12 miles to his nearest city, Shaw found exactly what he was looking for down Bridge Street, behind the shambles.
It may have been the fact that he was bored of his work, or didn't quite fancy working in a profession that would have likely seen him in a textile factory in the period. Or it may have been the fact that his father had promised him a beating should he return home and find the chores not done. Either way, it didn't take Shaw long before he encountered a recruit of the 33rd Regiment of Foot, who swiftly sold him the dream of working for king and country.
Come with me, my boy. I'll take you to a place where the streets are paved with pancakes and the frogs do go to and fro with knives and forks in their back saying, "Come, my lad, come and eat."
Yes, Conyard. Very good. Thank you, Conyard. Dismiss.
Hello.
Hello.
Luke Tomes. I'm here to sign up for the 33rd.
Right, Tomes, tell me a bit about yourself then.
Well, I am 26 years old. Now, obviously, John Robert Shaw was 15 years old at the time. Would we both have been able to get into the 33rd at those ages?
What we're looking for in any battalion is we're looking for younger men first, but that doesn't mean to say the army at the time were all sort of 16 to 18-year-olds. Aspiring lads who have got the ability to grow and to fill out and to show promise were accepted. But ideally we're looking for 17 to 25 or thereabouts.
So that's the sort of ideal Goldilocks range, is it?
It's indeed, but there were older men. That's got to be mentioned as well. So many men in their 30s, and you get examples of men in their 40s and even their 50s being within the battalion.
And what sort of men are you looking for? Because, you know, you hear all these stories about, oh, they're just dragging these criminals off the streets.
No,
the scum of the earth, as they say.
No.
What are you looking for? What's your ideal recruit?
Well, in the 33rd, we're a little bit different. You can go and you can be a drunkard, a layabout and join any other battalion, but not in Cornwallis's 33rd. They were known for their discipline and the sober attitude. So we're looking for young men, as it says in the recruitment poster here. So if you look at that, it says we're looking for men of conviction of character, those who are slight and well made, which is good. You've got good teeth. We need teeth for biting cartridges. But above all, we're looking for people with the spirit for adventure and to escape, if you will, like your dull lament of your everyday life.
So it's a mixture of your sort of attitude and the ethos, but also some sort of physical attributes. Is there anything apart from having good teeth that you're looking for? I've heard something maybe about having fine hair was preferable.
Well, I mean, your hair's a bit short. Your hair will have to be grown out. It's according to His Majesty's regulations.
Put that back on.
You've got some growth there, so minimum of sort of it really should be shaving every day or 3 days on active service and then has to be shaved. Cleanliness is above everything else. Linens to be changed every Wednesday and Sunday. So the aspect of being clean is very important.
The 33rd didn't just set high standards when it came to discipline and self-care. In the mid to late 18th century, the regiment was learning new evolutions in drill and light infantry tactics, earning them the nickname the Pattern, to be copied and emulated. With a reputation of being the best trained and most professional unit in the British Army, recruiting parties wouldn't take any old riffraff.
And a lot of the people, we have records, don't we?
We do indeed.
Their previous professions, a lot of them are they're tailors, they've got these respectable professions.
It's a misnomer that the British Army is full of criminal class. It's just not true of the 18th century. There were some occasionally, but it's the British soldier in the American War was a professional soldier. All these men behind me and all the men that went to America, they're on the average age of 27, about 15 years enlistment. So these are professional soldiers. They all come from a different story in all ranges of occupations. So yes, we've had tailors, we've had labourers, we've had hatters, potters, it's blacksmiths. Right across the whole range of the 18th century you find, and particularly the clothing trade as well.
Yes. Is there any truth in the theory that a lot of these civilians were looking to avoid working in these textile factories, perhaps John Robert Shaw himself, and that actually leads to quite a drive in recruitment in the period?
There's some truth in everything. The Industrial Revolution, socially, the way England is developing at the time, particularly in the north of England, in the clothing trade. So you tend to start to see automation of weaving. So the old weaving occupations as such will start to feel that pinch, if you will. So you do see a spike in those occupations starting to enlist. It's not necessarily to escape, but it's an option. But remember, as I said to you, Luke, it's about the aptitude of spirit and the character of the individual who wants to be that professional soldier.
Let's say I've made the decision already. I want to join the 33rd. What happens next? Do I receive any sort of remuneration?
Oh yes, you certainly do. Recruitment parties will give a bounty. There's sometimes up to 7 guineas, and of course the obligatory shilling to drink the king's health. But this will be not so fast.
Oh.
This will be as much as you can probably earn in the period for some men in a year. So it's an attractive, sort of opportunity. So you take that, your guinea, rest to follow, your king's shilling. You take that, and then you now start your journey as a recruit with the battalion, the recruitment party, and back to the infantry training depot, which is in Chatham.
Well, can't wait. I'll follow you.
All right then, come on then. Right, gentlemen, look lively.
Quick, march!
Whilst the 33rd was more than happy to make an exception for me, a likely more suitable candidate for the esteemed Grenadiers at my height of 6 foot, John Robert Shaw was certainly at the opposite end of the spectrum when it came to the calibre of potential recruits. Technically not old enough nor tall enough to be enlisted, the recruiting sergeant's captain, John Kerr, offered Shaw a shilling to go home and be a good boy and come to him in 2 or 3 years. Undeterred, Shaw threatened to join another regiment or enlist as a drummer, prompting Kerr to initially recruit the young boy as a waiter. Despite his undesirable position, far from his dreams of becoming an infantryman, Shaw at the very least had a foot in the door. But before he could make the full leap into the British Army, he had one more hurdle to overcome.
Now, you weren't legally bound to the army until you had attested before a magistrate, essentially saying that you had signed up voluntarily. For John Robert Shaw, this was obviously of no interest. But even if you had fully enlisted, there was still a chance you could be bought off out of the ranks if an agreed sum of money was paid. And this was the fate that almost befell the 15-year-old.
On discovering that his son had joined the 33rd, Shaw's father, accompanied by his uncle, had tracked him down and attempted to negotiate his release with the recruiting party. This was a tense moment. Reuniting with his son, Shaw's father begged the young lad to reconsider, but was met with the same response Shaw had given to the recruiting sergeant. "If you buy me off today, I'll re-enlist as a drummer tomorrow." Shaw's father gave in and departed in tears. Having now attested to the magistrate, I was ready to begin my military training and education. But before I was whipped into shape, I was due an appointment with a regimental tailor, James Graves.
James, how are you?
Good morning, Luke.
Here I am, a new recruit in the 33rd.
Congratulations.
And you are?
I am the master tailor of the regiment, and this is our tailor's workshop. So as you can see,
yeah.
we've got several of our tailors beavering away, making the clothing for the regimental soldiers. So the regimental tailor is one of the important parts of the regiment, because this clothing, when it comes to you, it's not made for you. It's basically made by contractors in a set number of sizes, and it probably won't fit. So it has to be made again, basically, on you, so that you look smart and intimidating to the enemy, and women want to be with you, and men want to join the army too.
Well, the attention to detail is incredible, and obviously you have a lot of soldiers who were tailors in their previous jobs. So
that's right. Yes, it was a much more common trade in the 18th century than it is now. And when tailors or people who had tailoring experience joined the army, it was a way for them to make more money than the typical soldier.
Got you. And as a recruit, what are the first items of clothing that I'm being issued?
In your recruiting party, you'll have been given some necessaries, basically, to keep you going until you join the regiment. And when you join the regiment, you're issued with a uniform. That includes, of course, the regimental coat, very iconic. You've got the cocked hat, another key part of the look. Waistcoat, breeches, shoes, shirt, stockings, and a stock as well.
Got you. Okay, and shoes made to size as well, made to measure.
So again, these would have been just issued in a few set sizes. One of the other jobs in the regiment would be the shoemakers, the cobblers. So there would have been other tradesmen in the regiment that would have been able to adjust these so that they didn't fall off when you wore them.
And talk to me about this, the design of this hat. It changes in the British Army, doesn't it, throughout the sort of 18th century? What period are we in now in terms of the fashion of the hat?
So the cocked hat is the pattern, the style that it is cocked in is decided by the king, and there's a pattern hat in the War Office basically, and all regiments are issued with these, and they have to be cocked in a particular fashion. But this particular style is what was popular in the army in the 1770s. Right. So it's got a slightly taller fan at the back, and it's less of a tricorn hat and more of a sort of, it's starting to become more and more like the bicorn hat that we know from later on in the period. And
you're wearing something different on your head. What are you wearing?
I'm wearing the forage cap, so this is or a fatigue cap. These are actually made out of the old coats. Oh. So you're issued a new coat every year. The old coat is recycled into different garments that can be sort of used to extend the life of your best dress. So this kit, this fatigue cap, is made so that to preserve the cocked hat. So you would wear this when you're off duty, when you're working. This is kept for formal occasions.
Underneath your cocked hat would ideally be a full head of luscious locks, carefully tied in a club when on active service. If you were bald or too malnourished to grow out your hair, wigs would be provided, along with grease to comb through and kill off lice, as well as powder, or in many cases, flour. Whilst soldiers' hairstyles clearly reflected the fashion of the period, more practical considerations were made when it came to the clothing worn by the British Army in the colonies.
In America, obviously, it's a lot warmer. The seasons, the weather is a lot more extreme. Yeah. So this clothing, which is suitable for soldiering at home, isn't necessarily suitable for soldiering in America. So for that, extra things would have been made. So trousers, usually. Breeches are a problem because they need to actually fit you properly. They need to be carefully fitted in order to function, in order for you to sort of keep them on. Yeah. Whereas trousers are a lot easier. You can just slip them on and they fit. So it's all about the logistics.
Got you. Okay, so it's a big logistical challenge and it's very important. And obviously uniforms also differ between rank, don't they? What would distinguish me, a recruit who maybe enters as a private, to your officers, your colonels?
Right, so the main difference is the quality of the materials used and the fit. So this kit is issued to you and then fitted, and it's made of a coarser quality cloth. The officers' clothing is privately funded. They go to a tailor's, like a civilian tailor's or the regimental tailor, the approved one for the regiment, and get a uniform made up out of superfine broadcloth. The lace is silver rather than worsted. The buttons are silver plate rather than simple pewter. And so it's a very spectacular uniform. There's an epaulette. So officers all stood out as being, sort of brighter and more sort of, They pop a lot more than the other ranks in their madder red. Sergeants have a scarlet cloth uniform, so it's sort of like a halfway house between the privates and the officers, really. Lastly, we have the drummers, who wear reversed colours. So in order to be able to be easily spotted by the officers on the field or in the camp, they wear a white coat in the case of the 33rd.
Yeah, I noticed at the recruiting party, the drummer.
That's right, yeah.
You mentioned that they're going to have a new set of uniform every year, but for a soldier, this is so important. They have to look after it.
Absolutely, yeah.
Is it true, myth or reality, that soldiers would have been sleeping naked so that they could preserve this stuff?
Right, yes. So we do have some, it sounds strange to us today, but yes, it was the custom amongst soldiers, at least we have evidence to suggest that it was the custom amongst soldiers to sleep naked. And the main reason was to preserve their shirts. Most civilians would sleep in a shirt, but the problem when you're a soldier is you only have a few of these and you've got to make them last as long as you can. So when it was peacetime in garrison or away from the enemy, they would have chosen to sleep naked when they could. In front of the enemy, obviously, you're going to want to be fully dressed when you go to sleep, so it's a different story.
So that could lead to some embarrassing hostage situations.
Yes, one of the thoughts is that officers actually encouraged it because it discouraged recruits at home from deserting, because they'd obviously have no clothes on. So
very interesting. That's very interesting. And lastly, you get a different answer depending on who you ask. The colour red. Is it so if you get blood on it, it doesn't scare your friends? Is it because it's the cheapest cloth? Tell me why the British are wearing red.
So the British soldier wears red because the British soldier wears red by this period. It is basically tradition. Blood does show on the red uniform. The traditional methods of dyeing actually mean that blood turns the cloth black. So it does stand out eventually. And regardless of the cost, this was the traditional colour of the British Army, certainly by the 18th century. So while it may have been chosen because it was cheap back in the 17th century, by this period it's become associated with the British soldier, and therefore we wear red.
The uniform of the 33rd was immaculate, but even more impressive was the history of the regiment itself. Its roots stemming all the way back to the early 1700s, when the unit was initially raised to fight in the War of Spanish Succession. The 33rd, or Earl of Huntington's Regiment of Foot, as it was first known, would become a stalwart of the British Army in conflicts raging around the world. Serving in the War of Austrian Succession, involved in the suppression of the Jacobite rising in Scotland, and later fighting in the 7 Years' War, the 33rd would soon see a change in its leadership that would come to define its role in the next few decades. On the 21st of March 1766, a young colonel by the name of Charles Cornwallis took the reins of the regiment. Born into an aristocratic dynasty that could trace its lineage back to the 14th century, Cornwallis had already achieved numerous military milestones by the age of 27. Cornwallis was, ironically, a loyal Whig supporter and showed solidarity with the American colonists by voting against the Stamp Act of 1765. Little did he know what awaited him. A stickler for organisation and discipline, Cornwallis quickly began to mould his unit into the pattern. With an upcoming review by His Majesty the King at Blackheath in 1771, Cornwallis was keen to show what he was capable of. As was I, as I made my way to the parade ground.
Hello, officer. I am now fully kitted out in my red coat. How do I look?
Well, you're getting there. Just wear your cap over your left eye. That's much better.
Perfect. Well, it's interesting to see the soldiers doing a bit of drill in the background when we think about the style of warfare that's going on. How important is drill and discipline, keeping those ranks organised?
Regiments could be anything up to 1,000 people. Just organising them is bad enough, but having to move them around in a hostile territory, deploying them into battle and actually engaging in warfare, you need a really robust system. Yeah. It can't be a system that breaks down under stresses. The men brought from all different walks of life have to work in unison. They need to understand the orders, they need to be able to hear their officers and see those voices and recognise them so that they respond instantly to any commands that are given. And only when you've mastered that art are you allowed to progress on to having a firelock.
Order! Firelocks! Move 1, 2, move 1, 2.
For the drill itself, officers like yourself, do you have anything to go by? Is there any template of movements, or is there a manual of any kind?
Yep, in 1764 the Army introduced its first manual for the whole of the infantry. This is the 1764 manual exercise. It brought together evolutions and firing, and soldiers were supposed to learn it by rote so that it became instinctive to them in any circumstances. It didn't cover everything, and so a business grew up with people writing treaties and manuals that covered all manner of different training, from the recruit right the way through to battalions and beyond. regimental officers also introduced their own differences to the 1764 in the 33rd under Cornwallis. And it's what gave us the name of the pattern.
And finally, Keith, Hollywood depictions of this period, we think of even Cornwallis, for example, colonel in this of this regiment, as these aristocratic, out of touch, really nasty characters, all the way down to the NCOs. Is that true, or is that sort of a myth of your hard-nosed officer and NCO as well?
I think like Roger Lamb, who was a diarist in the 9th Regiment, talks about his worst time in the army was during his training when he had a really severe drill sergeant. But the army are aware that that wasn't the way to train and look after their men. Recruits were too expensive a commodity to waste and get them disillusioned with the army. Yeah. And so the officers and NCOs who were looking after the men were told to be calm, not to lose their temper, to encourage men to be good-humoured about the way that they performed and compliment them when they got it right, and not to be too severe when they got it wrong. And if NCOs were too severe, they could lose their rank.
Oh, okay, so interesting. There's a little bit of man management going on there. Well, I must say, I'm slightly nervous to head over to the sergeant over there, but let's hope he's not one of those hard-nosed NCOs. Wish me luck.
Good luck.
So up to the shoulder, bring the firelock up to the shoulder, onto your left side.
Oh, left side.
That's it. Hold it just there. So we have what we call a fugal man. You're going to take your timings off this man here.
Okay. Order file up 1.
Bring your hand across.
Gun out only. Order file up 2. Move it down. Order file up 2. Order file up 3. Place it on the ground.
Good, so you're guiding it down onto there. It's muscle memory. This will take time to do. So as a squad, watching the fugal man for your counts, corporal counting the cadence. Ease, arms.
Come on, lads.
Come on, make it up. Come on, wake up.
You're not supposed to be the new one.
Malloy, see me later. Squad, stand easy. Squad, brace yourselves up. Do not move your hands. Parade. Bit faster there, Mr. Toms. Look lively. Squad, handle, arms. Now think about it. Shoulder, firelocks. Move. 1, 2. Move. 1, 2. Move. Dear Christ in heaven, Toms. What the bloody hell am I going to do with you?
That was the bit I was worried about.
You might as well join the American Army now. Right, that will come in time. Sergeant. Do not worry. Don't apologise to me. Shoulder, firelocks. Christ. And all the bloody saints. Corporal, give this man some education. Get him out. Right dress.
Despite my performance, the king was impressed. According to the Virginia Gazette, His Majesty was
so pleased with the fine appearance of the men and the dexterity, as well as the readiness with which they performed some new evolutions and manoeuvres, lately introduced by their colonel, that he expressed a desire to see them go through the exercise again, and accordingly did them the singular honour to review them a second time yesterday morning in Hyde Park.
The 33rd were reviewed once more at Plymouth a few years later by Major General William Howe, another man who was originally opposed to the King's treatment of the 13 colonies. Despite his favourable impression of the regiment, as more and more units were mustered in anticipation of a conflict across the Atlantic, he remained unconvinced that the British Army could conquer America. Nevertheless, he, like his beloved Colonel Cornwallis, would arguably play the most important role in a war that would alter the course of human history.
Boys! We've received orders. We march for Cork. We're going to America.
Get your stuff. The news, albeit delivered abruptly, came as no shock to the soldiers. Reports from the colonies of troubles, especially in Massachusetts, had been streaming into the United Kingdom for years, and ever since the famous shot heard around the globe at Lexington and Concord had sparked the American Revolution, members of the 33rd knew it was only a matter of time before they were called in as reinforcements.
The London Evening Post recorded that the 33rd Regiment of Foot, of which Lord Cornwallis is colonel, is ordered for America. And with that, the unit was to make its way to the port of Cork, by which time Cornwallis was promoted to Major General, before being divided between 4 transports, which they boarded on the 30th of December, 1775.
They now go out of their turn from an honourable zeal to support the dignity and rights of this country over her ungrateful colonies.
Having been kept in dock due to bad weather for 2 months, the convoys finally set sail. Diseases were a worry on these long passages, but even more of a concern for officers was the possibility of men deserting. If the fear of a major conflict wasn't enough to unsettle some men, the prospect of a long and arduous voyage across the Atlantic in winter, confined to a small transport ship, would tip men, in some cases, quite literally over the edge.
A soldier whose name was Brooks leapt off the forecastle into the ocean. The vessel in a moment made her way over him. The fear of punishment was the cause for this desperate action.
We were met with a violent gale of wind at southwest, which dispersed the whole fleet and forced back into port several of the transports and storeships, disabled and distressed.
After several months spent aboard their troop transportation vessels, the 33rd began to arrive in piecemeal off Cape Fear in North Carolina and were mostly mobilised in May 1776. With a foothold now in America, it was time to get to work.
Before I could do anything on the front lines, I'd need to become well acquainted with the equipment and weapon I'd be carrying into battle.
Keith, I've made it to the colonies, finally. I'm excited to get into the action. I've done my drill back in Britain, but I'm yet to receive the weapon that I'm going to be taking into combat.
Well, here you have the Shortland pattern musket.
Right, this is the Brown Bess, right?
That's right. Although it isn't called the Brown Bess in official terms. In official circles, it's very much a firelock. The Brown Bess as a name came in around about the 1760s, so by the time of the American War, it was in popular use. Mm-hmm. There's been a lot of research done into why it was called the Brown Bess, but I guess it explains why the official circles don't use it, because in the period, it was actually a term for a common prostitute.
Oh, right.
So it was a soldier's joke that became part of common parlance.
So it's almost the fact that it's keeping you company whilst you're all alone in the colonies.
That's right.
Right, okay, and in terms of the weight of the weapon itself, I imagine I'm going to be doing a lot of long marching. It's pretty cumbersome to be carrying miles and miles and miles.
It's actually the state-of-the-art weapon. This is the new model. So the previous model was the Longland pattern, which was a 46-inch barrel. This is 42. And this weighs about 10.5 pounds, which is 4.7 kilos. And actually, you get quite used to it very quickly. Your muscles build up when you're in training. So it doesn't feel quite as heavy as it might do when you're first given it. Once you get the balance and the weight right, you can heft it around doing the drill and on marches. And the sling works perfectly well.
And in terms of the use of this weapon itself, I want you to dispel potentially a myth. Are soldiers simply pointing this in a general direction towards the enemy? Are they just presenting and firing, or are they actually aiming this Brown Bess musket?
Absolutely aiming. Even in peacetime, soldiers were taught to use the ball cartridge and shoot at marks.
Okay.
Once war was in the air, powder became more plentiful, and so live ammunition was shot much more often. For example, in Boston Harbour in 1775, the 23rd Regiment rigged up targets in Boston Harbour and were shooting at the bobbing targets. Accuracy depends on all sorts of things, the man who's shooting it and the circumstances that he finds himself in. A trained soldier who can aim a shot individually is going to do far better in shooting than a raw recruit in a line firing a volley in the heat of battle. Later on, after the war, they did tests on the firelock and found that at 100 yards, about 50% were accurate. At 200 yards, 30%, and at 300 yards, about 20%. But it's still quite a reasonable rate for a smoothbore weapon.
Well, I fancy my chances. I've been fast-tracked into the army somewhat, but I think I'll also need a bit of a crash course in this weapon.
The principles of loading. So a round ball cartridge from the pouch.
Okay.
On your side, so if you take that out appropriately.
Yep.
Bite the top off. Get your paper out, that's it. Couple of good slugs in the priming pan. Shut that pan down. And then cast your piece about. Got the rest of your charge of your powder. Pour that down the barrel. Okay.
Obviously they'd be doing this at a lot quicker speed than I am right now.
Oh yes, yeah. Then obviously the ball will go in there. I'll pop your paper down in that. It's got to act as wadding, and that's going to firmly seat the ball down onto the bottom of the barrel.
1, 2, 3.
Make sure, can you feel it down the bottom?
I can feel it down the bottom.
Take the rammer out and pop it back into the housing.
Here we go.
You're loaded. We're going to ready to fire on the command.
Okay.
Happy?
Yeah.
Okay. Perpendicular up. Okay. Cock. Firelocks. That's it. Present. Fire.
On the 11th of May, General Henry Clinton, second in command of the British Army in North America, authorised a raid upriver to be conducted by the 33rd, 37th and Light Company of the 44th. This would be the regiment's first taste of military action on American soil. The target was Kendall Plantation, home of a Continental officer and senior North Carolina revolutionary. During the seizure of the plantation, rebel forces skirmished with the raiding party, resulting in 2 men killed and several wounded. In the darkness and confusion, a sergeant of the 33rd was also taken prisoner. In response, the plantation was torched, with the owner's freed slaves assisting in its destruction.
Historians estimate that roughly 20,000 runaway slaves joined the British forces during the American War of Independence. The experience of the Black Loyalists represents the largest exodus of North American slaves before the Civil War.
As some soldiers watched the spectacle, others brought out everything from chairs, tables, glasses and china to their boats. Nerves were settled, and a feeling of confidence bolstered the men. They had arrived and were ready to stick it to Washington's revolutionaries. But a few raids here and there weren't going to end the war. The first pitch battle for the 33rd would see them fight to drive the rebels out of the city of New York. Having launched an unsuccessful campaign to seize the port of Charleston, leading some officials to question the unit's capabilities, the pattern was keen to prove itself as an effective fighting force. They were transported via the South Expeditionary Fleet up to the vast encampment springing up on Staten Island. More than 30,000 troops, supported by over 400 ships offshore, prepared to attack rebel positions on Long Island.
Order!
With a force significantly outnumbering Washington's, General Howe's strategy involved a surprising flanking maneuver. while a portion of their forces engaged the Americans in a frontal attack, Howe led a nighttime march with the bulk of his army, including the 33rd, through the Jamaica Pass, a route left unguarded due to intelligence failures within the Continental Army. At dawn, the British emerged behind the American lines, trapping them between Howe's forces and the frontal assaults. The resulting battle was chaotic, both for the Americans and the British, especially the 33rd. Despite small, encouraging engagements, Washington's army would not hold out. The Continental Army would soon be overwhelmed by the enveloping British forces and would suffer heavy casualties. Around 1,000 Americans would be killed, wounded or captured, while British losses were comparatively light, with the 33rd actually taking the worst of the lot. Aside from snatches of sleep during the pauses in the march for an hour or two, captain of the regiment's light infantry company, William Dancy, and his men had been awake for 30 hours. They were exhausted.
The defeat came as a big shock to Washington's army, a delight to the Crown forces, and a relief to the 33rd. Cornwallis, Clinton and Howe all assumed that they had the rebels trapped around Brooklyn Heights and could force their surrender with a conventional siege. It was at this moment, when most of the Redcoats thought that the war was won, or many of them were taking the much-needed opportunity to get some shut-eye, that Washington conducted his daring escape.
Right under the noses of the Crown forces, Washington withdrew his army straight across the East River and into Manhattan. Many question how the British let this happen. Some put it down to the British strategy of outflanking enemies rather than launching costly frontal assaults, and hence why they left no men directly in front of the remaining Continental forces. In that case, where was the Royal Navy? Here the elements offered a helping hand to the rebel army. A north wind prevented the British ships from patrolling the river, and a dense fog settled over Brooklyn at daybreak, allowing Washington's force to complete their escape across the river into New York at 7 a.m. Spirits were still high though, after Washington's escape became apparent, with many soldiers, including John Robert Shaw, who was still in England at this point, remarking on the success of Cornwallis's regiment.
We had an account of the Battle of Long Island, and of the gallant and soldier-like behaviour of the 33rd Regiment, for which, as a mark of distinction, an additional riband of the orange colour was bestowed.
Newspapers such as the Gazette and New Daily Advertiser were also impressed with the glorious behaviour of the 33rd Regiment in their engagement on Long Island. The war, in the minds of many men, including those in command, was almost done, and their enemies had scarcely a better view of their own prospects. A few more run-ins followed until Washington withdrew his forces further into New Jersey. Howe continued his pursuit, crossing the Hudson in mid-November, only to find many of the positions he had prepared to fight for left completely abandoned.
By mid-December 1776, it seemed as if the 33rd's fighting in America was all but done. The New York campaign had been a massive success. Washington's army had been driven from outpost to outpost, outflanked, outmaneuvered, and defeated. And so on Christmas Day at Newport, 5 officers belonging to the Grenadier and Light Company sat down and dined and enjoyed the festive period. All seemed well, but before the next Christmas was even reached, 3 would be wounded and 2 would be dead.
What did you say?
Don't worry about it. Go on. Merry Christmas. Merry Christmas.
That same evening, Washington had crossed the Delaware and shot the British with victories at the Battle of Trenton and Princeton. Making use of local revolutionary militias, Washington adopted a mixed strategy of avoiding pitched battles and hit-and-run raids. By 1777, the British-occupied area of New Jersey was becoming an increasingly dangerous place to be.
It is now very unsafe for us to travel in Jersey. The rascal peasants meet our men alone or in small, unarmed groups. They have their rifles hidden in the bushes or ditches and the like. When they believe they are sure of success, and they see one or several men belonging to our army, they shoot them in the head, and they quickly hide their rifles and pretend they know nothing.
So, Robbie,
Yes.
it's 1777. We've just come off a pretty good victory at the Battle of Long Island, and we now find ourselves in the woodlands of New Jersey. Would you say that at this point in the war, the Redcoats are feeling pretty optimistic? They think the war could be over soon.
Absolutely. The end of 1776, they win a major victory around New York. The Continental Army is almost destroyed. It's driven into Pennsylvania over the Delaware River. And morale is high because the army thinks that come the end of winter, the start of spring, 1777, they're going to finish off Washington's army, wipe out the remainder of the Continental Army, and the war will be won. And that doesn't really go to plan because in December, at the end of December, the Continental Army starts a counterattack, wins a string of large skirmishes essentially, that really shows the British that the war isn't over and actually things are really just getting started.
Yeah, and it's at this point that the British encounter what we could call partisan activity, local militias that are giving them a bit of trouble in the woodland. Have they experienced that kind of warfare before?
To an extent, yes. So the British Army has fought in North America previously. They fought in North America during the 7 Years' War, where there was a lot of combat against the French colonists there and also the Native Americans, who were masters of that style of warfare in North America. They've also had experience from the start of the war. The 33rd weren't actually present at the opening battles, but that was very much a case of fighting against militia who are using what we might now call guerrilla tactics. So fighting from behind trees and walls and things like that. But a lot of the conflict has been more regular in style, what the 18th century would think of as a regular warfare in lines. And the 33rd themselves haven't seen a great deal of action in combating militia. They do technically have the tactics to do it because they've been trained in light infantry style warfare.
Of course, yes.
As early as the early 1770s. So they have the technical knowledge, but in terms of actually experiencing it, this is going to be the first time in New Jersey, yes.
And what are the local militia, the revolutionary soldiers, what are they trying to do? What's their aim of this style of warfare? Why are they using these tactics?
They're essentially trying to wear down the British and Crown forces in New Jersey by refusing to engage in a pitched battle, which they know they're less likely to win because they don't have the mastery of linear warfare in the 18th century.
Howe's chasing Washington, isn't he?
He has. He's won a number of victories pretty comfortably, but Washington knows that if he can keep his army together and chip away at the British forces now that they're settled in for the winter in various positions throughout New Jersey and New York, he knows that if he can chip away, then it will damage morale, it will harm the supply effort to keep the British fed, and it will essentially ensure that when the campaign season opens in 1777, they're on a more even footing again.
And you see the Hollywood depictions of what we now consider to be guerrilla warfare. Are they aiming at specific troops? Let's say there's a British patrol. Are they taking pot shots at officers and NCOs?
They are. There's one account by a German officer who talks about how the local militia, because they actually live there, that's their turf, they know the land, and what they would do is they would hide weapons, hide their rifles in ditches and hedges and things, and if there was an opportune moment where they see some soldiers nearby, they might grab them, take a pot shot, hide the weapons again, and then act as though they're just going about their business. So when the soldiers come to investigate, they just find what essentially appear to be civilians because they're not uniformed, and it's very difficult to prove then unless they can find the weapons that actually these are people engaged in combat against you. The response is therefore a bit disjointed because sometimes, you know, the army will treat these men as combatants. Other times they'll say, well, we can't treat them as combatants because they appear to be civilians. They could be civilians. It's a very grey line that the militia are deliberately walking in New Jersey.
And they've got to be careful because we often forget not everyone they see in the colonies is necessarily against them. They've got a lot of loyalist supporters, haven't they?
Yes, exactly. And actually loyalists are very distressed by what happens in New Jersey. There is a senior loyalist officer who's from New Jersey, and he writes with some despair that he's heard stories about looting and burning and pillaging that's been done by British forces that become frustrated with the rebel activity, the militia activity there. And so there isn't necessarily a great deal of differentiation between loyalists, revolutionaries and the neutrals. The vast majority of people don't want to be involved in the war either way, but if the war is happening in their area, then they will likely be caught up in it.
The difficulties in determining who was friend or foe began to slowly drain the morale of the Redcoats and drove many soldiers to question the army's broader strategy in quelling the rebellion. Moreover, those in command could do little to suppress or conceal the realities of the war effort, with a rampant rise in reporting and access to broadsheets.
Back in Britain, it takes about a month for reports to come back from the colonies. How is the war reported? Do soldiers read the broadsheets? How do they hear news? Does the ordinary civilian know what's going on day to day?
To a large extent, yes. In the 18th century, we see a real explosion of printed media, and especially in North America. North America has the most printed media of anywhere in the world at that point. So things like everything from newspapers to magazines to broadsides, pamphlets, all of that sort of stuff. And that's really harnessed in America by the revolutionaries. They use it very well for propaganda purposes to kind of spread their word. Back in Britain, there is actually a divide because not everyone supports the war. So there are some people in Parliament and some organisations in Britain that actually more or less, they don't quite openly back the revolutionaries, but they're against the war essentially, and they have printed media as well. And then there is a faction that's very much pro-war, and this is pro sort of intervention and wants to take the colonies back. So all of these viewpoints are represented. Typically soldiers, perhaps unsurprisingly, fall down on the anti-revolutionary side of things. There is, especially after things like the partisan warfare in 1777, there's a very negative attitude towards the revolution, the revolutionaries. The soldiers basically don't like them, understandably. You know, there's sometimes this romantic view that a redcoat, because they are from like a poor background essentially, and there's this myth that they get press ganged into the army. That maybe they don't actually hate the revolutionaries. They've just been forced to fight them by this cruel regime. In reality, most British soldiers, in the few accounts they leave, tend to be pretty. They don't really like the revolutionaries and what they stand for.
It won't take long after if your colleagues and your friends are getting shot down before you turn. Now, at this point in the war, as you said, we've just had a victory at New York. They're getting hampered a little bit by this guerrilla warfare. And Howe changes tactics. He focuses on the city of Philadelphia. What is it about the city of Philadelphia that makes it such a prime target?
Well, essentially, it's the capital of the rebellion colonies at this point. So the 13 colonies, they have their own sort of individual miniature capitals, like obviously Massachusetts, you have Boston. But Philadelphia had been chosen as the home of Congress. And Howe's previous objective had been to destroy the Continental Army, because that was the main revolutionary force. And when he'd failed to do that, he'd nearly succeeded, but he failed in 1776, he decided to switch tactics and try and take the center of power as opposed to focusing on the military objective. So he sees Philadelphia as, if he can capture it, then perhaps the rebellion will fall apart. Congress will be forced to relocate and flee. It's a very European way of thinking of things, because in standard European warfare, if you are at war with another nation, if you capture their capital, then that's a big thing. They're probably going to surrender.
They collapse.
So he's hoping that, having failed to take out the army, the next best thing would be to maybe capture Philadelphia.
Well, I can't wait to get out of this woodland and get into a city, some warmth and some lovely food.
Me neither.
Let's get back on the march. Let's go, lads.
Having initially anticipated the destruction of the rebellion in 1777, Howe soon began to despair, losing hope of ever drawing Washington's Continentals into a battle of annihilation. He now fixed his hopes on capturing Philadelphia, seat of the rebel Congress, a blow that would surely snuff out the revolution's spark. South of the city ran the river Brandywine, which the Redcoats would have to cross to reach their target. It was at one of these passages, over the river, that Washington decided finally to plant his forces, ready to take on Howe's army.
The dawn of the 11th of September was shrouded in a heavy fog. Perfect conditions for Howe to yet again test Washington's generalship, using the same tactic that he had used at New York a year earlier. Whilst one portion of his army would keep the rebels' attention fixed at Chad's Ford, another would swing round to the northeast and cross the river further upstream. They would then come around from the north onto Washington's army in a grand flanking manoeuvre. The 33rd would be part of this left hook, commanded by Cornwallis.
Setting off at daybreak and covered by the fog which slowly lifted, Cornwallis's force was soon ready to swing round to the south and bear down on the Continental Army. Loud thunderclaps of artillery could be heard from Chad's Ford, where the fighting had already broken out. A few minor engagements were won, but as with their previous experience in New York, the 33rd was exhausted from marching 12 miles in under 9 hours. One man dropped dead from exhaustion. As retreating rebels informed Washington of the overwhelming force that was wrapping round his right flank, Howe ordered a pause to proceedings, allowing men to sit down, draw food from their haversacks and eat. After an hour's delay, the 33rd reformed and began the descent down the hill using light infantry tactics, separating to bring the attack to the enemy from all sides. Some of the troops even laid prone when firing at the crust of Birmingham Hill, a tactic happily employed by all light infantrymen and one that was used throughout the Revolutionary War.
It was at this point in the battle that Dancy was shot in the thumb. But despite the blood and the pain, he refused to quit the battlefield, continuing to lead his men through the heat of the engagement.
Both sides of Washington's right flank were crumbling, and crumbling fast. With a combination of artillery fire and successive bayonet charges, Major General John Sullivan and Adam Stevens' troops were forced to evacuate. General Nathaniel Greene organised a skillful rearguard action, which allowed most of his American troops to withdraw in relative order. Again, General Howe had won a decisive pitched battle, but could do little to follow it up. Exhausted from marching and fighting, his troops simply couldn't pursue Washington. Despite the failure to completely annihilate the Continental Army once and for all, on the 26th of September, Cornwallis led British and German grenadiers accompanied by cavalry and artillery pieces, into the city of Philadelphia. The soldiers marched through the streets to the sound of God Save the King, whilst the main army occupied the nearby village of Germantown. The city was to be spared, with many inhabitants fearing its destruction, although rumours abounded that the rebels themselves had intended to burn it. Rumours also spread that the British Army operating on the northern end of the Hudson had suffered a great defeat, although others claimed the commander John Burgoyne had had a great success. Whilst all these tales were debated, the 33rd remained in Germantown. On the 4th of October, the crackle of musketry was heard through the fog at 5:30 a.m. The sound only intensified through the next couple of hours, with the thump of artillery now accompanying it. Washington was on the offensive. The British forces stationed at Germantown numbered around 9,000, with advanced pickets guarding their flanks. Washington's army of about 11,000 soldiers quickly began their four-pronged attack on the village, initially achieving some success in driving back the British outposts and forcing their troops to retreat into defensive positions. However, the smoky and foggy conditions led to miscommunication, and friendly fire incidents caused the assault to falter near the Chew House, a stone mansion fortified by British troops under Lieutenant Colonel Thomas Musgrave. Instead of bypassing it, Washington ordered repeated attacks, which proved costly and ineffective. British reinforcements exploited these weaknesses and counterattacked, forcing the Continental Army to retreat after about 4 hours of fighting. The Americans were slowly driven out, suffering approximately 1,000 casualties. Washington had suffered yet another spectacular defeat.
March, march!
With the victory at Germantown, the city of Philadelphia was now secure, but the 33rd had paid a heavy price for their efforts. 2 NCOs and 2 privates were killed, 1 lieutenant and 20 more privates were badly wounded. There were signs within the camp that the men were growing tired of the conflict, or at least were manifesting its swift conclusion. As Captain Dancy states, "I look upon the glory of this war over. I have been at the beating of the rebels in 2 general engagements and have seen their capital taken." But in spite of the victories won, the end was nowhere near in sight. What's more, there were rumours that the British were about to come face to face yet again with an old foe.
In the next episode, I'll discover how the British Army slowly lost its grip on the colonies, struggling to adapt to the conditions in the south and maintain discipline throughout its ranks.
That thing stings. It really does.
It's a brutal implement.
With a combination of more first-hand accounts and hands-on experience, I'll be exploring the dangers to life on and off the battlefield for the pattern.
Fluxes, fevers, agues, yellow fever, cholera. More British soldiers died in America of disease and illness than any rebel led or owned.
How they maintained morale in camp.
Women were allowed to go along with the troops. They could probably give as good as they got.
And why Washington was to achieve the ultimate victory and the United States of America was born.
So Luke, it's good to see you again. It's been a while since we've done one of these episodes together, isn't it? And once again, I think my side's going to win.
Mate, you're in dreamland. The British colonies are staying British.
If you want to find out what life was like for a British regular during the Revolutionary War, then check out Luke's video on History Hit.
And likewise, if you'd like to know what life was like in Washington's Continental Army, go check out the video on Survive History.